pleasure to welcome you to our Forum on the Hill for November, continuing a series of how we're engaging the world in important topics. If you came into the church today, or if you've driven by on Germantown Avenue, you'll see about 200 t-shirts for the next few days. All of those carry the names of persons who have been killed by gun violence, part of heeding God's call to end gun violence. And that's a profound experience to look at those names and realize the vastness of that list. Another profound way to remember and to ponder how we might respond is mounted in this room. So if you're here in person, I hope you'll take some time. And if you're not here in person right now, you have another month or so to come look at what is the 5th annual Soul Shot Portrait Project exhibition. And to talk about that a little bit more, I'm really glad to introduce my friend Rebecca Thornburg. Rebecca.
Thank you, John, and thank you to Mary Angela for inviting me to be with you this afternoon for this program. I'm honored to have a chance to talk about my experiences as being part of the Soul Shot Portrait Project. I worked with Laura Madeline on the very first exhibition in 2017. She and I were co-chairs in realizing her idea of having victims of gun violence be shown in the lives that they lived through portraits made by fine artists. Since then, I have worked kind of on the sidelines in creating the catalogs, the printed pieces, and I meant to bring one up with me today, but they're at the back table. The catalogs which are available for people to buy, to take home as a memento of what the exhibition looked like. And I've done that for 4 years, and I just did the math. That's 250 people whose lives have been shown in these exhibitions, more than that. So I've spent a lot of hours doing business with the content for these catalogs, paying attention to the images. Are they the right size for printing? Are they in the right place on the page? The text that goes into the catalog, do I have the title right, the dimensions, the media, the commentaries from the artists and from the family members of the victims of gun violence. It's a lot of time to spend dealing with minutiae, but also with very hard realities, very hard stories. I found myself thinking about, as I'm still doing, thinking about the portraits and the stories behind them at all times during the day. And I found that in a way I have come to have a kind of feeling of communion with what these physical pieces hanging on the walls, what they represent. It's come into my heart. It's become part of me. And so today I was thinking, what would I like to share with you all? I'd like to suggest that you do kind of a thought experiment as you look at the works hanging here today. We all look at a piece of art as a whole. We stand in front of it, we look at it, we think about it, we have a feeling. We may remember it, we may not, but it's typically the way we appreciate a work of visual art as a whole. So I'm asking you today to think about the layers, the process, all of the steps that go into making this work, and sort of taking it, peeling back the layers from the last finished moment when the artist chose a frame. How is the piece going to be presented on the wall? Then going back another step, looking at the piece when it's almost completed, the final brush stroke, the final stroke of your stylus on the computer screen. When is it finished? And then further back than that, think about the drawing. Really think about the drawing the artist had to consider. What do I draw? Do I show a face, a torso, a full figure? Do I show other figures, people who are important to the subject of the portrait? Is there an action scene? Is it quiet and still? The artist makes all those decisions, but I think the huge moment is that the artist has to be in touch with the family member, the person who is grieving, the family who is grieving, the loss of a life lived. The artist has a conversation either in person or on the phone and has to ask this person who has lost someone dear to them to talk about it. Tell me your stories. Share your photographs with me. Who is important to your son or daughter, wife, husband, mother, father? How did they spend their time? What did they do? This artist who isn't trained to do this, this is a person who decided he or she wanted to be part of this project. And especially in the time of pandemic when it's even harder to reach out to people, this artist took it upon himself or herself to make that contact, to have that very difficult, hard conversation, to weep with that person. It's pretty huge. And then go back to his or her studio and look at a blank piece of paper and try to think about this huge undertaking, this kind of sacred duty that you have to represent that life, that oh so important, unique, unbelievable life in a physical representation that will tell that story. And I think about that a lot, what that means, what it means to the artist, what it means to the family member to have that kind of communion together, and then what this work of art brings to all of us in making us understand a little bit more, resonate a little bit more, and commune a little bit more with the lives that were lived and the people, the souls who we lost. So I encourage you to take another deeper look at the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, very much. And again, for those in the room, I hope you'll spend some time looking at the portraits. For those of you who are watching later on, I hope you'll come to the church and look at these portraits again through the middle of December. And you can certainly visit the Soul Shop Portrait Project website or call one of us at the church for more information. But I can tell you what a profound experience it is to spend time with these portraits. And perhaps your heart and your soul and maybe your action will be touched by that. And on that same theme, it's really my pleasure to introduce to you a new friend of mine that we've met just over the summer. Catherine Nerney is a sister of St. Joseph of Chestnut Hill. She received her PhD in systematic theology from the Catholic University of America. She serves on the faculty of the Chestnut Hill College in the Religious Studies Department and also serves as the founder and director of the college's Institute for Forgiveness and Reconciliation. Words that are very important in our life together these days, forgiveness and reconciliation. And Kathy Nerney specializes in the theology of the church. And as I said, we've become new friends over the summer, and I hope that friendship between us, but also between our communities, can continue to grow. But even in the newness of the friendship, she is no stranger to the important conversations we are seeking to have. So it's my pleasure to welcome Sister Kathy Nerney.
That's so wonderful. So thank you, John, and thank you, Rebecca, and thank each of you for being here. I was saying when I arrived today that it's been such a long time since, I've moved to doing presentations from virtual back to live. I've been teaching live at Chestnut Hill College for this semester, but I've never taken a mask off. So I'm glad we're at least 6 feet apart. And it is an honor for me and really such a wonderful opportunity to be able to talk with you today about a journey to forgiveness and reconciliation. And I'm going to use the metaphor of a journey because forgiveness and reconciliation is not a one-time event. It isn't something that happens overnight. It really does require time and commitment to engage it. So I'd like to suggest that forgiveness and reconciliation are today, in our 21st century, one of the ways in which God is inviting us to help heal our wounded world. That forgiveness and reconciliation are the great work of love. And so I'm sure you would agree, and I know it's not easy to kind of see this thesis that's up here. So I'm just going to read this to you as we begin. In other words, this is what we're trying to explore today. So the world in which we live today is both wonderful and wounded. And though we don't want to miss its wonders, we likewise are called to see and address its wounds and its brokenness with the willingness to name our present reality. This, the 21st century in which we live, is our moment in salvation history. Here and now, God entrusts us with the gifts to forgive and reconcile, that we may be in the world who God is, the great unrelenting lover and healer of our wounded world. I think it's pretty idealistic to think of ourselves as those who are called to be in our world today who God is. You might say, wow, that's asking a lot of us. And yet, I think that there is the potential for all of us to become more and more like our God. Why? Because the seed of God is in us all. And together we help one another to grow. So if I'm going to take this not as some idealistic statement, but as a truth to be lived, I want to share with you some of the ways in which I've come to learn about this kind of becoming more like God. And I would be remiss if I didn't invite you to come with me, where I learned so many lessons about forgiveness and reconciliation from the broken-hearted people in Rwanda, which suffered a genocide in 1994, where over 1 million Tutsis were slaughtered by the Hutus. So rather than give you any kind of a history of the genocide, I simply want to share with you that this was a broken-hearted people. Having studied forgiveness and reconciliation, I didn't need any more theories. I needed to meet living people who really approached this journey and did something to change not just their lives, but the life and future of this broken, decimated country. So I was fortunate enough to have a sabbatical in 2006, and I spent the semester in Rwanda. And not to tell you that I learned so much more from those people than I did from all my years of studying would just not be accurate. So I need to share with you that when I met the broken-hearted people of Rwanda, I found in them such an outpouring of love and compassion that it overflowed as a balm that helped heal not only their own hearts, but the hearts of people that they came in contact with. And I have to include my own heart in that. So I would like to just invite you, if you would, just stay with me, because I believed that what happened to the Rwandan people was that they learned to see others with the eyes of God. If we could see others as God sees them, we would see that in everyone there is some capacity to love and heal that God never gives up on, never gives up on. So to see with the eyes of God, I think, is an amazing gift for all of us to pray for. And I learned this from the people of Rwanda. So I would ask you to come with me, to travel this road with me, and to learn as I did, that the path to forgive and reconcile is not smooth or easy. And not for 1 second did the Rwandan people underestimate the work that they committed themselves to learn to love in a way that's stronger than hate. So if you can just look at the hilly paths of Rwanda, it gives you some understanding of the landscape of forgiveness. It can be a steep road to climb, it can be windy, and it can be full of rocks and unsmooth surfaces. But I want to suggest that it's worth the effort to get there. And so as I arrived in Rwanda in January of 2006, one of the first places we visited was the Kagali Genocide Memorial Center. They opened this in 2004 to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. And like these portraits from the Soul Shot Portrait Project, when you get to this memorial, it's more about calling us to live rather than die. It's teaching us that these victims of gun violence are living. And I loved when Rebecca said that her communion with them, it's like she's carrying them around in her. They go on as their stories continue. And so at the Genocide Memorial Center, they have 3 different exhibit rooms. And the first of them is dedicated to the slain children of Rwanda. When you enter that center for the slain children, thousands upon thousands of children were slaughtered during the genocide. And when you enter there, there is a shrine in which you can actually kneel before every portrait of a slain Rwandan child. And there you will see different things posted. What's their favorite food? What were the last words they spoke to their mother? And you just move from one shrine to the next, looking at the faces of the slain children. And after a while of gazing upon those faces and just feeling the heartbreak of this experience, I can remember looking down in my hand at the flyer that was given to us when we entered this children's memorial site. And in my hand, I looked down at this flyer, and it says on the flyer, I don't know if anyone reads French, but si tu me connaissais et si tu te connaissais toi-même, tu ne m'aurais jamais tué. I just looked at that and I thought of its meaning. So this is it. If you had known me, and if you had known yourself, you would never have killed me. Think about that. If you had known me, and if you had known yourself, you would never have killed me. When I first read those words, I thought of it as simply a time to lament, a time to mourn the slain children of Rwanda. But the more I stayed with it, the more I saw it as a bequest from those slain children to each of us and to all future generations of children. Can we promise, can we make the commitment that we will strive to get to know another person and to get to know ourselves more deeply? Because I think if we could practice that commitment, we would not be able to harm another. If we could see in them a part of ourselves, we would not be able to harm them. And so I'd like to just offer that as something that the slain children of Rwanda will pass on, and something that the slain portraits that we have hanging here of people in our own city who have suffered from gun violence because they were harmed by another. So let's try to think about that commitment. And so we too pray for this gift to come to know ourselves and one another better as we walk the journey of our own lives here and now in the 21st century. And so I'd like you to come with me to a secondary school in Buramba, little southern village in Rwanda. And there I met these 2 women, Sister Martha, who is the principal of the school, and Sister Colette, who teaches there. I just want to share one story about them. During the genocide, this high school in Buramba was a place where many people came to hide out from the Hutus who were slaughtering the people in their little huts, their little homes. But the school was safer because it was brick, it had more security, and so hundreds of people hid out in the school during the Easter holidays of 1994. And it was during that time that Sister Colette, who taught at the school at that time in 1994, she managed to escape when the Hutus came to the school, and she made it down that big hillside with 40 children that she managed to save as they hid in the banana fields there. And during this time, 5 of their sisters were killed, as well as hundreds of others. So the school closed after the genocide of 1994. In the year 2000, which was a Jubilee year of reconciliation, the sisters decided they would reopen the school. And Sister Colette asked if she could go back there, go back to that terrible site of such slaughter, because she thought that if she could build a new future there, she could help heal the past. And there are so many people today who have suffered grievous wrongs, who begin to heal by doing something good for the future. I know there are many of the parents of some of these victims of gun violence who are now working to prevent gun violence in our city. So they're healing their past by doing something for the future. And so here in Barambo, I met over 80% of the students who are all survivors, but they've lost their parents. So thousands upon thousands of families in Rwanda are children-led. And I met many, many children, learned so many of their stories over a 2-week period I was there. And I just want to share one story with you. And this is a little girl, her name is Edith. So when I think of, what does a little 18-year-old girl have that can help us learn something about our hearts opening to forgive and reconcile? Edith told me this story that she was about 6 years old when the genocide happened, and she was one of 4 sisters and 1 brother. And she said when the Hutus came into their village, her 14-year-old brother took traveled a road to see if it was safe for them to make it to a French encampment. It was kind of a safe haven, as the French called it. If you could get to this encampment site, you might be saved. And so the brother started out to try to go to that site, but he didn't come back within a couple of days. The father set out to see if he could find his son, and both of them were killed on the side of a road. And so Edith, with her mother and her 3 sisters, her youngest sister was only 18 months old, being carried on the back by her mother. They set out because they had to try to find this encampment. They did make it, and shortly after they arrived, Edith's mother and her 18-month-old sister died from malnutrition and exhaustion. And so Edith was left with her 2 other sisters. And so Edith shared that when she got to Barambo, she was full of pain and bitterness because of what happened in her life. And she said that in a short while, she began to realize that all the other girls in the school were carrying around the same pain. And she thought, there's no way I could get to know them or care about them if I don't find a way to let go of some of my pain. And so what Edith did was kind of let go of her bitterness so she could make room for others to enter her heart. And she said, and today I love all these girls, and they love me, and I am so happy. And the truth is, I don't know if you can even see it in this image, but she radiated happiness. And she said people that she meets asks her, what's her secret to happiness? And I thought, I'm going to pay attention to this answer that she gives. And so I listened, and Edith said, and my answer is not too much self-concern. Not too much self-concern. I could open up space for others. I will be able to heal myself. And I thought, what a great lesson. Not too much self-concern. And so in Edith, I saw that the forgiving love of God just opened her heart to love. And she became someone that everyone loved because she was mirroring this love of God in so many ways. As a matter of fact, I just learned that Edith has entered a religious community, and I thought she's just wants to share more love. So I know she's a wonderful person. And so in the rainy conditions of Rwanda, being there through a rainy season, I just learned that God was washing away so much of the pain of people and opening them to new life. And one of those examples was a rainy day in which we were not able to visit this health clinic where we were supposed to spend the day, but it was pouring, pouring rain, and you just can't walk those hillsides. And so what happened was I spent the day with this young girl, Claire, and I could spend the rest of today talking about Claire, which I won't, but I'll simply say that Claire is an intimate part of my family today, because once I met her, every place we went in Rwanda, Claire showed up. And just a tip of Claire's story is to say that Claire's father was a Hutu, who were the perpetrators of the genocide, and her mother was a Tutsi. And one Saturday morning, when Claire was 7 years old, her father came back to the house, which he had left a few hours before, with a group of Hutus. They dragged her mother outside and slaughtered her, while Claire was inside listening to her mother scream. So I could simply say, Claire would tell you she lost her identity because the Tutsis would not respect her since her father was a Hutu, and her father, who's now in prison, has abandoned his children. So Claire is still searching for her identity. I would say her path is still pretty insecure, but we're working with her and loving her, and she knows that, and I do think that's helping her. This is the village of Muharanje, and I want to tell you about this group of people that you see on the screen because they became very significant for us in Rwanda. They're called les bons Samaritans, the Good Samaritans. And they formed after the genocide because they were praying with Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan, rescuing people who had fallen on the side of the road. And what the Good Samaritans do, whether they are Hutus or Tutsis, is they want to do what Jesus said, go and do likewise, as that story of the Good Samaritan ends. So how do they go and do what the Samaritan did? They go into prisons. They go into asylums, hospitals, anywhere that people are in need. And they don't ask any questions. Are you a Hutu? Were you a Tutsi? Did you perpetrate the genocide? Did you suffer from the genocide? They don't ask that question. They go in only to bring God's mercy and compassion to the people wherever they go. So let me just tell you a little story about Speciosa. That's the woman in the brown here. So whenever you are in any kind of prayer ritual with the people of Rwanda, they read scripture, they pray, they dance, and then they always offer some testimony. Where are they finding God in their life? I think those personal stories of our own encounter with God are so helpful to one another. They make Scripture come alive. And so Speciosa shared her story this day when I was with them. And Speciosa shared that 32 members of her family were slaughtered in the genocide. Her mother, father, siblings, her husband, 4 children. She has only one son left, Ignace, whom we met several times. And so Speciosa said that after the genocide, she was filled with hate. And she said her inner life was so disordered that she didn't know how she was going to go on. And she said she would not leave the house because she could not tolerate seeing a Hutu on the road. To her, every one of them was a monster. And so she kind of hid herself away. And she said after several months of feeling this disorder, she used to leave in the afternoon and go to the church and just try to quiet down so that she could heal or get some peace of mind inside herself. And she said, while she was in church one day, she began to realize that God still loved her. She could feel God's love when she was there. And she began to think, if God can still love me when I'm carrying around all this hatred for those Hutus, is it possible that God still loves those Hutus? Could God still love my enemy? Is that possible? Well, think of the ways we could ask that question. And she said she began to realize that God loved them too, that they were human beings just like her, carrying pain and hatred in their hearts too, and God still loved them all. And she said, when this came to me, she said something changed. I just began to see them differently. They were no longer just these hated monsters. I saw them as another human being like myself. And so Speciosa said it was then that she decided to join the Good Samaritans and see if she could bring this compassion to other people. And so it was through the Good Samaritans that I was able to get into the prisons in Rwanda. Now, you could think whether you're in Rwanda or whether you're here, that prisons are the site of evil people that we lock up. There are people who have that thought in their minds, isn't it? Evil people, lock them up. And yet, in the prisons in Rwanda, as is true in the prisons in our own country, there is often a flood of grace that happens in the lives of those prisoners if we allow them to be hurt human beings in need of healing too. So here in Rwanda, this is a prison in Remera, and the Good Samaritans come every Thursday and every Sunday to visit the prison. And they do the same thing. They read from Scripture, they pray and dance, and then they give testimony. And it was in listening to the Good Samaritans tell their stories that many of the Hutus began to realize the harm they had done. Before this, they thought they were justified. You know how sometimes people do something and they can see all the reasons why they did it? Like they deserve to be shot. They deserved. It's like they justify their own action. And it was only in listening to the stories that they began to realize the harm they had done, and many of them began to repent. So I think there is this sense. I remember this poem. I don't know if you know Denise Levertov, the poet, but this is called On the Mystery of the Incarnation. And this poem came to me really visiting a prison. And this is what Levertov says. It's when we face for a moment the worst our kind can do, and shudder to know the taint in our own selves, that awe cracks the mind's shell and enters the heart, not to a flower, not to a dolphin, to no innocent form, but to this creature, vainly sure that it and no other is godlike. God out of compassion for our ugly failure to evolve, entrust as guest, as brother, the Word. So the Word became flesh, that we might see how God lives. What kind of compassion and forgiveness flows from the heart of God through the life of Jesus, that we could learn to evolve. And so I saw the people in the prisons evolve. I saw a spirit of repentance come over them. And I'd like to share with you just one story. Honestly, reducing things to one story is sometimes hard, but this is a story of Charles and Genevieve. And this story, I think, was very life-changing. Sister Genevieve was not in Rwanda during the genocide. She was ministering in Cameroon, and her family was slaughtered during the genocide. When she returned to Rwanda, her family was all gone, her home was destroyed, and she decided she would join the Good Samaritans so she could start some kind of healing. And it was a Thursday morning, and Sister Genevieve got on a van. There was this white van that picked you up to go to the prison. And when she got on, she made this announcement. She said, "I'm really having a bad day, but I wanted to at least show up. But please don't ask me to read anything, and don't ask me to testify." Did you ever have a day like that? It's like, please don't ask me to do anything, I'm just about making it. Did you ever have one of those days? I had. So I could understand Genevieve wanting to go, but she didn't want to be responsible to share anything. And so they got to the prison, they read from scripture, they prayed, and the first person to get up to give a testimony that day was a prisoner. It can be either a Good Samaritan or a prisoner. And this prisoner, his name was Charles, got up. And the first thing he did when he got up was he went over and he knelt in front of Genevieve. And he said, "Genevieve, I have already asked God's forgiveness, and I am ready to do anything that justice asks of me. I will serve any sentence that I get. But I need to ask you for forgiveness. I killed your mother and your father." And at this, Genevieve screamed, and she said, "Charles, how could you have done that? You played with my brothers and sisters. You ate at our family table." And as Genevieve was weeping, Charles too was just bursting in tears. And the next thing that happened was not another word was spoken. The two of them just began to embrace in something that no one could break up. The entire prison was silent as Genevieve and Charles were like flooded in this grace of forgiveness and compassion. And there was no one who said anything else that day. And I think that this compassion and forgiveness overflowed from Genevieve and Charles to everyone who witnessed it that day. And the reason I say that is because within a few weeks, I remember it was a Sunday morning, we were in Kagali at a Jesuit center there. And we did what we did every time the Good Samaritans were there. We prayed and we had testimony after the homily that day. And one of the people who got up to speak was this man in that shirt. His name was Clément. And Clément began to say that he was a Tutsi prison guard, still is a Tutsi prison guard, and he works at Ramera prison. And he said that he hated all of those Hutu prisoners, and he treated every one of them with disdain. he just so hated them. And he said, this group of people, the Good Samaritans, came there every Thursday and Sunday. And he said, I know they didn't do any harm, but I thought they were a gang of fools. And in French, he was saying, les fous. They're just fools. But I let them come. And then he began to talk about the day he was back there in his own disgusting manner. And he began to tell the story of Charles and Genevieve. And he said, when I saw that, something broke open in my heart. And I realized that my disdain for the Hutus was another act of hatred that was doing nothing but spreading hatred. And he said something opened up inside me. And before the Good Samaritans left that day, he apologized for the way he had treated them and said he would like to come to some of their gatherings so that he could learn more about God's compassion and mercy. So I thought, here was Genevieve, who didn't even want to show up that day, that God used her in her weakness to really call forth such an amazing flood of grace. Isn't that amazing? Like sometimes it's when God will use us when we feel least able to do something. And so that was the story of Genevieve that's had such profound effects. I just want to tell you this story. I'm trying to keep on time. So here's, her name is Anne-Marie, and she's the founder of the Good Samaritans. So I already told you, I met them and went with them so many different places. And whenever Anne-Marie, the founder, was there, she would ask me to say a few words. And sometimes I would be so broken up after listening to the stories that I could hardly speak. But this given day, I remember it was March 19th, which is the Feast of St. Joseph, and it's a day where back here we renew our vows, we do all these things as a congregation. And so it was the Feast of St. Joseph. And as a congregation, we live and work that all people may be united with God and one another. That's our mission. It's living that. That's the daily challenge. And when Anne-Marie got up this day to introduce me, she said, Kathy, when you go back to America, we don't want you to just tell our stories. When you go back to America, we want you to figure out where your divides are. Cross over those borders and bring healing and forgiveness there. When I listened to her, I thought it was such a challenge that I could not keep that challenge to myself. So of course I brought it back to the college. We did all kinds of work with what would that ask of us? Like what are the divides that we're facing right here? Because there are many, are there not? Many things that divide us. If anything, we've become more polarized since then. The divisions are great. And so how can we move into those areas that are really confrontational and try to bring healing and forgiveness? This is just one example. There are many, whether it's gun violence in our cities, whether it's the racism that continues to plague us, whether it's the inequity caused by poverty and lack of education. There are so many issues, and they're there for us to say, what are we going to do about them? And I think that that challenge, that lesson, is something that the Rwandan people determined they were going to do something about it. They've made a 20-year commitment to reconciliation. And so it is the faith of the Rwandan people that helps them to see like God. Actually, it's the largest ratio of Christian people anywhere in Africa. And everywhere you go, you see signs of their faith that's helping them make it through this. So you can see walking along the street, this is Psalm 23, carved there on the rock. Even if I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil, for you are at my side. And this would be all over in Rwanda. There are such recollections of people who were killed. There's no way to miss it. These memorials are everywhere you go. And I think one of the things about that is that the Rwandan people don't hide their evil, the pain that they've suffered and the pain that they've caused. And I think sometimes if we try to hide it, we never face it, we never change it. And so there are things that I think we face today, evils in our churches, evils in our cities, evils in our interpersonal relationships that all need healing. So as Michelangelo carved this sculpture of the Pietà, so we have suffering people now holding broken bodies of their loved ones. And we say, how can we, as people of faith, do something to help? The people of Rwanda sing a song. It's a beautiful song. It says, our burden is heavy. We need help to bear it. And I think we can all say, people carry burdens we don't even know about, and they need our help in bearing it. So rather than condemning people, if we could learn what their burdens are, we could learn to help. Poverty is just one issue. We go through so many. When I asked the people of Rwanda how they manage to seem so happy and resilient, how do they really manage to make love stronger than all the hate they've experienced? How do they do it? And they said, they're carried by the Word of God. I said, is there any particular Word of God that you think carries you? And over again, I heard people quote this same verse from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11. I'm sure you know it. Jesus says, come to me, all you who are burdened. Everybody know that? You're weary and find life burdensome, and I will give you rest. So it was amazing because one day I was passing this little chapel by the side of the road, and when I went in it, I saw there in Kinyarwanda this little quote, come to me, all you who are weary and find life burdensome. And I thought, the people of Rwanda do that. They really rest in God, and they get the strength that they need. And so this is my friend Wynn who went with me, and one day we decided we were going to take a night off and go to a retreat house just to try to gather the stories that we had learned and figure out what is it that makes the people of Rwanda so able to forgive, while some of us carry much less in terms of harm, and we don't think we're able to forgive. What is it that makes it possible for them? And so we prayed with this and went off, and this is what we came up with. The people of Rwanda have the strong virtues of empathy, compassion, and humility, both of them. So try to think about them. Empathy and compassion and humility. And do we need to grow in either of those or both of those so that we can be more forgiving and reconciling? It's all over Rwanda. You see how people carry one another. It's so literal you can't miss it. So it's mothers carrying their children, it's siblings carrying their little brothers and sisters. All over, people are carrying one another. And there's that great sense of compassion and empathy. I don't just take care of myself. What Edith learned and taught about not too much self-concern, that's what I found all over. This is an AIDS clinic. The people cook big, big buckets of soup to try to nurture the people in this AIDS clinic. So you can see all the people struggling. Here's the second thing. Noticing that the people of Rwanda are so humble. And I think humility is probably one of the things we here in the Western world and in the United States need to focus on. I don't know if you know the work of Bill McKibbins, the environmentalist. Well, Bill McKibbins wrote this line that has stayed with me. He says, I think the purpose of the 20th century for us in the United States was to try to figure out how big and important we could be. And we determined that we are big and important as all get out. And he said, perhaps the purpose of the 21st century will be to decide if we can grow a little smaller, if we can fit back into our rightful place on this planet. Can we grow a little smaller? Humility doesn't ask us to think less of ourselves, but it asks us to think of ourselves less. That we are not the only concern that we need to have in our world today. We could think of ourselves a little less. The word humus in Latin, from which humility comes, means ground or earth. We've all come from earth. We all belong to the same human family, and we need to grow a little smaller. You can't be in Rwanda and not realize how close to earth the people are. Nor can you be close to them without being willing to bend down a little yourself. It was the number one gesture we practiced in Rwanda, bending down. As the people sat on the ground, you went down to be with them. At every place we were, this sense of getting smaller just kept touching me. And this was a very interesting photo, and I do think photos do help us to remember, because these little children were in line to go into their classroom, and I wanted to take their picture before they went in. So I got my camera, and in order to take their picture standing there, I had to bend down to get them. Can you picture that? Well, as soon as I bend down, can you see the kids? Like, oh, they're all doing exactly what I'm doing. I thought, I can't get any lower because they're following my example. And I thought how true it is that our children are going to follow our example. What they see us do, they will do. And so, whose example do we follow? This is something that became so clear to me in Rwanda, because I know that the people have followed the way of the cross. So let me just kind of end with this story of the cross. I think John said, you know, I study theology. You could say I have my PhD in theology, and so I studied the law of the cross by the theologian, philosopher Bernard Lonergan. And I can tell you the three components of the law of the cross that I memorized. But I saw the people of Rwanda live the law of the cross. The law of the cross has three things, as Lonergan names them. The first is this, that evil exists. Evil in our world exists. And we both experience it and participate in it. We experience evil in our own lives and in our own sin, and we participate in it. And one of the things I realized in Rwanda is that they admit that they too participate in evil. And here's a church in Rwanda, and outside the church, there are skulls of slaughtered children. And when I saw that saying on top of those skulls, of course, I don't know Kinyarwanda, I had to ask, what does that say on top of those skulls? And they translated it. It says, here Rwanda lost its humanity. Here, Rwanda lost its humanity. So they acknowledge not just the experience of evil, but their participation in it. And I ask, do we acknowledge our own sinfulness, the ways in which we contribute to the wrong in our world? The second law of the cross says that Jesus took upon himself the evil of the world. Jesus took it upon himself. And he said, let the evil stop here. So Jesus hung on the cross saying, I will not pass on this evil. I will absorb it in my own body. So Jesus took upon himself the evil of the world and would not pass it on. Every time you refuse to do something mean to someone who says something mean to you or does something mean to you, absorb the evil. I'm not going to shout back at you. I'm not going to hit you back when you think of all those things. Think of all the ways that you perform the law of the cross by absorbing the evil rather than passing it on. And then the third law of the cross says simply that God blessed the self-gift of Jesus and raised him to new life. God blessed that self-gift, giving himself over, and raised him to new life. And this is what I found in Rwanda. The people of Rwanda are very clear in saying, we are a crucified and risen people. And so one of the things I discovered so clearly in my time in Rwanda is that you cannot be in Rwanda and not dance. There is a joy that is more powerful than any sorrow they've experienced. So I say, no, you can't be. I don't care whether you don't like to dance or you can't be there and not dance, because it's just a gesture that says we are a risen people. And so it's that sense of the Rwandan people have discovered that they need a way to move forward in life, and they've chosen the way of forgiveness. It's a lesson that they taught me, and a lesson that I want to pass on. Because what are the steps of forgiveness? And see if you have practiced these, even if you couldn't articulate them. So the 3 stages of forgiveness are simply, we give back the humanity to the person who offended us. Everyone is more than the worst thing they ever did. Everyone is more than a thief, a rapist, all the ways in which we label people by the worst thing they ever did, a liar, and we try to return their humanity. Behind that bad thing that you did, there's a human person in need of healing. We return their humanity. Second, we give up our right to get even. I do not want to return evil for evil. Vengeance will never heal our brokenness. Only forgiveness can do that. And thirdly, eventually, we even wish well to the person who hurt us. I hope that nothing bad will happen to them. I actually hope they learned a lesson and will be good people. So I know it's about time for a few more, but I think I'm going to stop. And I simply want to leave you with one, I guess, little symbol of the Rwandan people, because everywhere I went in Rwanda, I saw people whittling, especially out of the wood of a eucalyptus tree. And many times they were carving crosses. And the crosses always said, we are a crucified but risen people. And it's that faith in new life that I think keeps us saying that regardless of the divisions we suffer today, we are not going to give up. We are going to address them. We are going to do something about them. We are going to try to work for healing and reconciliation in our world as they're doing in Rwanda. So I'd like you to just, if you would like to, take with you just a little whittled cross. I just brought some small ones with me. You see, like, they whittle these out of these tiny little pieces of wood. They're pretty amazing. So I think this might be a reminder for us that death doesn't have the last word, and that evil will not triumph, and that we really can overcome hatred with love. And so I think this cross might help us to remember that. So I'll just leave it here for you to take. All right, I think I'm going to stop. Is there anything anybody wanted to comment on?
Might we express our appreciation for Kathy's work? And we are about at our time, but I think we have time if there's a brief question that we can have a brief answer to. All right. I think we've had a profound experience in the last hour, friends. I really do. And I hope you'll redirect your friends who weren't here today to the website. Come look at the t-shirts, look at these portraits, go to the website at the college on the Center, the Institute for Forgiveness and Reconciliation to continue this conversation, and find ways in your own life, whether you're a Christian or not, or whether you're a practitioner of any faith or not. I think some of the lessons today about forgiveness and reconciliation are what we need right now. So Kathy, again, thank you so much, and blessings to you. Friends, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you, and have a good day. Go in peace.